Hello there, and welcome to the fourth in the Genuinely You Empaths series. My name's Gina Gardiner, and I'm joined today by Lizzy Bernthal, Dr. Lizzy Bernthal, who is an amazing lady and an empath. She's a mindset leadership coach, an international speaker, author, a well-being, resilience, and cultural change specialist who supports authentic leaders and ex-military to stand tall, rediscover their voice, to own all of who they are so they can soar. As I said, I'm Gina Gardiner. I'm an international best-selling author, speaker, motivational speaker, but my work for over 30 years has been around empowering people, leaders and empaths, to be the best they can be, to enable them to be the leaders of leaders. And our work in these videos is to share with you some of the insights that we both had in terms of our journey. And today's video is all about accelerating your journey as an empath. And I want to set up today's video by talking to you about evolution and metamorphosis, because I think it's so important to recognize that our journey is one of growth. We are lifelong students. That's what we're on this earth for, is to learn about ourselves, about the world, and how we can be of greater service moving forward. That's my belief. You may think something different. If you've got any questions or any comments you'd like to make, please email us, Gina, G-I-N-A, at genuinely-u.com. That's Gina at genuinely-u.com. Love to hear from you. And if there are themes that you would like us to explore in greater depth, or things that we haven't covered that you'd like covered, please let us know. So, evolution. Well, I think it's an evolution which incorporates a metamorphosis. And I'm going to use an example that we're all very familiar with, and that is that of the butterfly. If you think of the life cycle of the butterfly, you start off with the egg, and that then hatches into caterpillars. Caterpillars crawl around, chomping furiously, usually at the plants you don't want them to, in order to grow nice and fat and juicy. And then they form a chrysalis, and inside the chrysalis, the pupa becomes unformed and eventually emerges as a butterfly. Now, the metaphor is such a powerful one, and many people are familiar with it in terms of, that however much you feel you're a caterpillar crawling about, that there is the opportunity for you to grow into a butterfly and to fly. But I want to use this metaphor in a very specific way. Now, I take no credit for this specific way. It's working with my mentor, Ali Nicole, who has helped me recognize how by expanding this metaphor, it can be incredibly powerful. So let's imagine that butterflies and caterpillars can talk. Caterpillars talk the language of caterpillars, okay? Now, language is an interesting thing, because whenever two people are talking, they are creating, one hopes, a shared language. There's Lizzie's version of language, there's my version of language. We may use the same words, but very often, unless people have a discussion about those words, they don't actually have the same blueprint for those words. We talked about blueprints before. Excellence is a great one. One person's excellence is another person's mediocre. Unless you talk about the behaviors that you want from that, in that context, you're not going to have a shared language. So imagine that Liz is talking. What fruit would you like to be today?
Oh, mango.
So Lizzie's mango and I'm grapes, okay? Very, very different. But if we create a shared language, becomes the language of fruit, okay? Now, having said all of that, I want you to think about caterpillars who are able to talk to caterpillars in caterpillar language, okay? And that's, if you like, that's the first level of evolution. And many of the empaths that I work with are working at the level of a caterpillar. They may know they've got a purpose, that they have done some work on themselves, that they are still limited to being around on the ground level, that they've not yet learned to soar. They haven't let go of the limiting beliefs. They haven't done all of the inner work that's required for them to become the leader of their own life. And so they talk the language of caterpillars. What happens when the caterpillar changes into a pupa? Interestingly, they become completely unformed. If you cut a pupa a couple of days after it's become a pupa, there is not, you can't cut it and still see the caterpillar. It starts to change into something which is actually different. And so the evolution of an empath actually follows the evolution of the butterfly, if you like. Because when you start to get out of your own way, you become something that's qualitatively different. You are energetically more powerful. You have access to your inner wisdom and to universal consciousness, but maybe not quite, don't quite know how to use it, but you're in that place that you're not a caterpillar. Now, once you're a pupa, there is no way of going back. You can't become a caterpillar again. So I think the first thing to say to you is, if you are ready to take this evolutionary journey, recognize that once you let go of all of the limiting behaviors, limiting beliefs, the old baggage, all of the things that have been holding you back, be mindful that unless you are aware and that you actively choose to let those things go, it'll drag you back to being a caterpillar. Once you start the journey to being a butterfly and you're really serious about it, there's no going back. Okay? So you're in the pupa, you're unformed, that you are just energy, that you are starting to explore the possibility of your divine purpose and how you can achieve that. We were having a conversation between videos about purpose. Lizzy, I thought you made a really, really good point. I'd love you to share it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about, if you've seen in the previous video about purpose and the questions you ask yourself, I think it's really crucial that you ask yourself, why is it important to me? Because we need to have completely engage in it, and it needs to be part of our being. And if it's not important to us, we'll never engage in it, and therefore it won't happen. So I think that's a really crucial of what's it giving me, so I can give that to the world. So whether it's supporting your family or whether it's changing the world, that is your purpose, because that is fundamentally important to you.
And I think that's such an important point, but I also like that, well, you and I have got grand purposes. As, as my nephew says, grand porpoises. But it's not about the scale that is so important. It is about recognizing what's right for you and becoming the best version of you, and whatever level of service that is, recognizing that's okay, so long as you don't limit it because of your being fearful, because your ego's getting in the way. And empaths are, their DNA, their very encoding is about making a fundamental difference. So if you have the courage to step into being who you are and embracing your purpose, you will find that you actually can make a big difference. So now the pupa is developing. They've noticed that where they breed butterflies, if they help the butterfly out of the pupa, the butterfly fails to fly, because it's in the struggle that the blood goes into the wings and they're able to fly. And one of the other things that's really common for empaths is that they over nurture their clients. They want to do it for them. And what I've recognized is that having needy clients makes the empath feel important. Look, I am enough because look how much they need me. And so you end up with a relationship that I believe holds both back. For me, the important thing is that you empower whoever you're working with so they can fly. Now, one could argue that's very bad business, because as soon as they are empowered, they go off and do their own thing. But ultimately, we're going to be talking about vibration, and ultimately you want to be working at the vibrational level where people are attracted to you, so that you're not constantly going out finding clients, that you are generating that vibration which people says, do you know what, I need a bit of Lizzy, or I need a bit of Gina. She will help me on my journey. She will help me fly. So recognize, A, that the struggle is part of your development. We've talked about, things going on in your childhood and your adulthood. Even if it's terrible abuse, it has the power to help you grow and strengthen and develop. But also recognize that, it'll only strengthen you if you let go of being a victim. If you stay in victimhood, then you can't be strong. And that does require courage and often requires help. So do reach out if you're in that place where you need some help. So you're now the butterfly. To start with, it dries its wings and then it starts to fly. Think about perspective. What's the perspective that a caterpillar has when it's crawling on the ground? And think about the perspective of a butterfly flying above the garden. Now, butterflies speak to butterflies. They don't speak to caterpillars. They don't go and find a mate that's a caterpillar. They go and find a mate that's another butterfly. And so how do you communicate with people who are operating at the level of caterpillar when you are operating at the rate of a butterfly? Well, one great way to do that is to write books. Because when you write the book, you are writing at the vibration of where you are. Through the writing, one of the things I've discovered is through writing the book, clarifying your thoughts, setting out what you really believe and think, and how you might help people move forward, you evolve too. Now, if you keep at that place, at that evolutionary energy level of where you were, you can't develop as quickly or as much as you would if you're ready to evolve. And so then you move on and you work with people at the new vibrational level. And as you grow, so you write a publication for them. And then you move on to the next level and so on. So evolving can be really enhanced through writing. It's also a great form of passive income. And it means that you're freeing your time up to spend time one-on-one with fewer people, but at a much greater value. And in doing so, evolving yourself and others. Becoming a butterfly, being able to soar. And there is another level which doesn't fit the metaphor, but ultimately, if you want to soar, then you soar like an eagle, that you actually take yourself to the greatest heights. And those who want to achieve the most must actually be brave enough to step off the cliff, to ride the thermals, and to fly high. So it's a metaphor that works so far, but it doesn't take you all the way. Now, Lizzy, what thoughts have you got around this metaphor and how it impacts on you and the work that you do?
Yeah, I think it's so powerful and I love it and I use it a lot. And that, that's why I use, as you said to me about what I do, I help people soar, to be that eagle. I think what's really interesting with that metaphor is there's no going back, but also the more we grow, the more we realize how much we need to grow. It's a mountain with no top. So I think there's a real distinction when we're soaring like an eagle or like a butterfly. We can have still moments where we kind of almost want to be back at that caterpillar, However, the difference between when you're soaring in as an eagle is that you just don't stay there. And I think that's really interesting. Where you're a caterpillar grubbling around in the lettuce leaves, you are staying grubbling around in the lettuce leaf. And when you're soaring, you notice when you're suddenly finding yourself back in that chrysalis or back as a caterpillar and think, right, okay, enough. Where am I going? Back to soaring again. And it's the noticing and the awareness. I think that's what's key.
I think, I mean, metaphors work so far, but ultimately you're listening to this and that you have decided to step into your power to fulfill your divine destiny. It's recognizing that evolution requires you to be engaged in that. So there are certain things that can hold you back. And one of the things is to recognize that the language you use is really important. And how you language the new energy, because so much is habitual, it's very, very easy to drag yourself back because you're using the language of the caterpillar rather than the language of the butterfly. So putting it in the past, using the past tense for the old stuff is quite a useful construct. I used to, but now I'm, and recognizing that language has a vibration, that every word that you use, every tone that you use has a vibration behind it. And it's picked up at some level by everybody. Other empaths will pick it up very significantly, but everybody will pick that up. So let me give you a very simplistic example. Let's use the word thank you. Thank you is a beautiful word, isn't it? Not used enough, I don't think. But the tone and the context of how it's used makes a huge difference. Oh, Lizzy, thank you for being part of this, and it really is heartfelt. Thank you. It's great. Thank you. There's a very, very different vibrational energy when you're using thank you in a sarcastic or in an ironic way, when you're wanting to make your point to someone else. Just be aware that your language has a vibration, it has an impact, and be mindful of the language you use to other people. But actually, as if not more important, is the language that you use to yourself. That voice that goes round in your head. One of my clients calls it the bloody parrot, because it squawks. And it's usually saying negative things, not now, but it was then. And I said to her, what do you do if you've got a parrot in a cage? Not that I would have a parrot in a cage, but let's say you have. What would you do to keep it quiet? She said, well, I put a cloth over it. So I said to her, well, if that parrot's squawking in your head, why don't you put a cloth over it to quieten it? Better still, why don't you shoot it? It's not real. You then don't have to keep covering it up. Made her laugh, and she very quickly, as soon as she heard that negative voice saying you can't, you shouldn't, you mustn't, she decided that she would have a cartoon parrot and she would shoot it. So the language we use to ourselves and others is just so vital. Recognize, are you using the language of caterpillar? Are you using the language of butterfly? Are you using the language of an eagle? Are you allowing yourself to evolve? Now, you've been doing two at once because you're in such a hurry. I think we're going to have you in a rocket ship, not as an eagle. I think if we're going to take the metaphor. Would you like to explain what made you decide to use them and how you've been using them, what impact they've been having?
I think, because we've had these amazing conversations, and I realised that, yes, my purpose is so strong, and I was holding myself back. Enough was enough, and just do it. And therefore, there was no time to waste. So I haven't got time to do 30 and 30. Just let's do it all at once. And I think what's been really interesting is really having that time to reflect on what is it? What are those limiting beliefs holding me back? What are those thoughts of my childhood? What are those thoughts of people, how we respond? And then noticing there's a pattern. And it's, as we've discussed in previous videos, it's the awareness. And it's just so liberating, because it's like stepping off the diving board and just knowing that you just knew you had to do it, but quite not just want somebody to push you. And I suppose this is where the challenges is that metaphorical push. Just launch yourself, just go, and then there's no lowing back. And you see in David Attenborough these wonderful nature programs of birds, little cygnets, whatever it is, just learning to change into swans and then learning to fly. And it's that sort of, do I jump off or do I not? And you see them literally hesitating, and then suddenly you've got the mother ahead saying, come, 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 and they just do it. And it's almost like you see the pride in themselves. So yeah, it's just, there's no time to waste, because every day you waste, or every minute you waste, that's that moment where you can't help someone else.
That's brilliant. Also, how aware are you of vibration and energy, and the importance of the vibration that we operate at?
100%. It's all energy. And I think the energy we portray is so powerful. The energy, as we all discussed in a previous video, I think I in my head I have this vibrational, and there's obviously lots of pictures of it, this vibrational sort of triangle, and in seconds we can move ourselves up. We don't have to go straight from the bottom to the top, although we can in seconds do that too. It's noticing when our energy is low, because it's all connected. The language we use in our heads, the words we use out loud, all relate to what energy field we're in, and we have a choice just to change it. And if we change it, then we make the whole world better, because we generate more positive energy, and it gives others permission to just do that too. But acknowledging that for some people it's harder. So, just because we're feeling great doesn't mean other people are. And that's a conversation to be, where the empathy comes in, is to understand that for some it's more difficult. And let's just have a conversation to just have that so they can have their awareness too.
Brilliant. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? Energy, because unless we switch the light bulb on, we can't see energy. And in fact, we don't see the energy, we see the outcome of that energy, don't we? So for those perhaps who are less familiar, I want you to imagine there is a continuum. Talked about that before. At one end is fear, and at the other end is love. Now, we are all connected energetically, so how we are operating energetically in the world has an impact on those around us, but it also has an impact in the energy field around the world. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert, so people are getting my version of it, and there'll be lots of people who say, oh, that's not right, or it's like this, but this is how I view it and how I use it to help other people think about how they are operating in the world. We are connected. We are all energy. So when we are thinking negative thoughts, that has an impact on us and those people around us. If you're in a room with somebody who's in a bad mood, it's like a miasma, isn't it? Filling the room with fog. It connects. If somebody comes in and they're bubbly and they're bright, it might be difficult initially, but actually that can lift the mood. Now, if you think about fear, and imagine that line we talked about in the last video. So above the line, right at the top, is love. Love is the highest vibration. Gratitude, forgiveness, joy, all of what we would say positive emotions are above the line. And there is an emotion wheel. People have created emotion wheels. There's lots of things like that you can use. But ultimately, if you think about love at the top and fear at the bottom, just above fear is hate, okay? Hate is generated by fear that people are different, fear that people will take something that's ours, fear that people will hurt us. So hate, division, jealousy, all of those negative emotions are below the line, and they operate at a much lower vibrational level. Now, those of you that have some understanding of the new era of consciousness, that we're moving into this time where feminine energy is on the ascendancy. So male energy, logical, quite it's quite division. It separates things into units. It's either or, tends to be black and white. Feminine energy, creative, it looks for solutions. It has the capacity to be compassionate, to be kind, to nurture. Now remember, I'm not saying that men only do one and women only do the other. We all have the capacity to do both, and it's really important that we have a balance. But ultimately, the more of us who are operating above the line, coming from a place of love rather than a place of fear, that has an impact on the whole. You know, we've been going through a pandemic, and we are now, many people are being vaccinated, and what they're looking for is herd immunity. So in many ways, energy is a bit like that. If there are enough people who are coming from a positive place, you start to generate more quickly. You almost create a herd immunity against the negative emotions. And the tipping point is relatively small. You know, if I am impacting on 100 people, and those people are then positively impacting on 100 people, and those people on 100 people, very quickly you just explode the numbers of people for whom this is working. One of the reasons I believe why it's so important for empaths to really own their own power, to come from a place of love and positive vibration, is that you are a really important part of the tipping point. And that if you don't come from that authentic place of love and abundance, then you are holding humanity back. You know, one of the paradoxes is how many empaths talk about the universe being abundant, and yet they live a life through lack. Not enough clients, not enough money, not enough of this, not enough time. When the reality is that when your vibration is operating at a high level, you will attract abundance in your life. Let me explain this, because it is so important. We get more of what we focus on. If you focus on the negative, then it seems to grow, doesn't it? You know, the day when the cat's been sick, the car won't start, the washing machine is overfilled, and your child has had a tantrum, and your husband has gone off and left his phone behind. Recognizing that if we focus on all of those things, the day just goes from bad to worse. But if you can take a deep breath and recognize that whilst all of those terrible things are happening, there are great things happening too. Being grateful, you talked about the importance of being grateful and how that can turn things around, and recognizing that, you know, maybe these things are a sign just to take a breath and slow down. You know, don't make up great stories about, you know, it always happens to me. It's ultimately choose to be in a different vibration. It works incredibly well when you, for example, are wanting somebody from something from someone else. And I'm not suggesting you use this in a Machiavellian way, but if you expect somebody to say no, to be difficult, you are emitting a vibration that makes that more likely. If you are open to the fact that they'll say yes, and you know, one of the phrases you might use is, you know, is there any possibility that you could find your way to making this happen? And in my experience, people will go the extra mile and they will help that happen. So how you operate vibrationally is incredibly important. Lizzy, are you familiar with Esther Hicks and her work?
Yeah. Love it. Yeah.
What's your understanding of her work?
I think, well, the law of attraction and all that is all energy. And I find what's extraordinary is when you're in that high frequency of energy, doors open that you can't possibly imagine. It's almost like the world is waiting for you to show up. And when you show up, it's just extraordinary. But when we're in a lower frequency, the doors are still there, but we just don't see them, just like you talked about in the previous video about finding the money. And so I think that's what I see, is that it's all there for the taking. But it's down to our energy to be open to it. And when we're open to it, the world is extraordinary and there in a way we could never imagine.
it's interesting. I've only came across Esther Hicks about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've listened, and there's loads of stuff on YouTube. But what's interesting for me is she talks about the vortex. We each have a vortex of energy, and whatever is within that vortex becomes our reality. So the I want this and I want that comes from a place of lack, because if you want it, you haven't got it. And so she talks about having a desire to make things better rather than a want, because the desire comes from moving forward, whereas the want comes from being stuck. I interviewed a guy called Michael Lozier on the W4CY radio show, and Lizzy's been one of my guests. You can find those on YouTube, the W4CY Leadership for Life YouTube. They're also on all of the big podcasts. 78's on the Apple podcast list in the UK as of today, which is great. But Michael Lozier was the guy who wrote the Law of Attraction. So he has sold millions of copies. He's been on Oprah's show several times. He's an amazing guy. And he talks about that there are certain words that you want to take out of your vocabulary. Don't. Okay? Because the brain doesn't compute don't. Don't think of a pink elephant. You can't not think of a pink elephant until you've thought of a pink elephant, can you? So don't, no. He talks about always couching the language in terms of what you do want rather than what you don't. And he, I think, had started his journey having listened to some of Esther Hicks' early work. And he was published in the 80s, long before The Secret came out. But ultimately, you are the creator of your destiny. And as Lizzy said, how you vibrate not only impacts you, but impacts on other people. So start to focus on what you do want rather than what you don't. Be aware of your energy. And if you are in the dumps, if you are, feeling that you are, really life is heavy and difficult, then do a pattern interrupt. Go and do something different. It's my belief, it's why the Brits are so good at tea, is that in the getting up and putting the kettle on and making a cup of tea, you are actually interrupting the pattern. But even better, go and do something that makes you laugh. One of my clients, his way of doing it was we went and did Ministry of Silly Walks from Monty Python, and by the time he'd skipped and hopped around his office for a couple of minutes, he'd started laughing at himself and his mood was lifted. So his vibration was lifted. So be aware of your vibration. Lizzy's been doing the 2 challenges. They come out of stepping into your genuine power as an empath and accelerate your power as an empath. If you want the early stuff, it's in Harnessing Your Power as an Empath. They're all on Amazon. Go and help yourself. And the 4th one is about to come off the press very soon. I'll talk about that in the next video. So Lizzy, thank you once again. A lot in today's video. You know that if you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually take off the transcript and copy and paste that and have those so you can refer to it. You don't have to write notes, but they can help you. You can do that. It's very easy. So thanks so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.